And right before we start, we have live blogged the whole interview on Wowhead. It's the article right on the top of the front page. Mm-hmm. So it's not a word-for-word transcript, but the person who did it, Serene, writes very fast, so they are fairly detailed summaries.
I was super surprised because I was referencing it as we were taking our notes, and I'm like, she's faster than me, and she's writing so much more. I don't understand. So good on her. But the first question they talked about referenced, what about flying in 6.2, and why isn't it coming directly in 6.2? Why is it going to be in 6.2 point whatever? And they touched on things like bugs, like collision issues and quest fluidity, and they didn't mention phasing, but I would assume that has something to do with it as well. And that in order to address all these issues, they don't want to delay patch 6.2. They'd rather just patch it in a few weeks later. And
right, which I think everyone is very happy. I think that, you know, since they admitted that 6.1 was very light on content and maybe even should not have been 6.1, that they needed to get 6.2 out. The timing was right. It's the start of the summer. More people have time to play. And just delaying it further would create, you know, confusing perceptions, and it would just drag on too long.
Yeah, it's not bad anyways, because there are those Tanan reps that are necessary to get the Draenor Pathfinder achievement, so it's not like anybody would have been able to fly the moment 6.2 went live anyways. So especially if they can time it so that it's like 3-4 weeks afterwards, like it would be ideal anyways. And the next question actually had to do with those reputations, and people wanted to know how long they were going to take, and if they would be able to be done at once, or how that worked. And you've actually done a lot of testing on this.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about this. Yeah. So you can get the 3 Tanan reps done at once. You need to do the Garrison campaign quest to have your faction hub unlocked.
Yep.
And there is a mix of different things. It's not like the 6.0 reputations where you just grind mobs in an area.
Yeah.
So you've got the Saber Stalkers, which you can do in a day if you grind them out, but there's also weekly and daily quests.
Mm-hmm.
Another
and there's
one.
Those totems too.
Yeah, you can get totems to summon bosses. The Order of the Awakened, which is the Apexis themes one, makes you kill rare spawns and treasures for quest items. And then you've got Hand of the Prophet and Volden's Headhunters, which are a mix of story-based quests like the Garrison campaign, as well as doing some Apexis dailies. And that's the longest. It takes about 3 weeks to get to Revered, but you can speed it up, you know, if you're a human with diplomacy, or you have the trading post with that 20% buff, or things like the Dark Fair party hat.
The Hellfire Champions, too, you can kill them. They spawn every day, and there's 4 of them. You can kill each one once a day, and they drop an item that increases your rep to all Draenor factions by 1,000. So if you were diligent about killing them every day, and you maybe had those other things, you could get it a little sooner, but it shouldn't be too bad of a grind even for an average player, especially since, like you said, it's split up as to what you're doing. It's not like go out and kill 8,000 of these mobs and then you did it.
Yeah, which I think is good. I mean, if you don't want people to feel overwhelmed and feel they have to binge and kill everything all of a sudden, I like how the Order of the Awakened one makes you just kill 10 rares a day and that's it, and you can't really do too much else.
Yeah,
there's
just,
it helps pace the player.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like World of Daily Craft where you felt obligated to do 50 dailies at once because you could.
Because you can.
Yeah.
And they did briefly talk about Pathfinder being a possible blueprint for future expansions, so they're going to look into seeing how it works with, you know, all of the lore master and the dailies that you're required to do and stuff like that, and see if that's going to work in the future as a new way to unlock flying in future expansions. And I think what I really liked hearing about this is that they've clearly thrown out the idea of no flying in future expansions. Like, they just outwardly were like, oh, we're already thinking about that, which it's nice to hear. And they also admittedly said, like, we didn't have any plans on putting flying back in the game, but when player feedback was where it was, like, you guys are important to us, and we need to do something about this, and we need to compromise. And I think the compromise was good.
Yeah, I thought that it was made sense. I was one of the people who thought that flying would be nice, but I thought a big issue was getting people out of the garrison, and sometimes I would feel silly that, you know, Mimron's head, for example, was waddling on the ground and looked very sad. So I'm one of those people that goes, you know, if there was flying, I would actually feel better about myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, I sympathize that it was challenging. They got that overwhelming feedback with the VentureBeat interview. And they were obviously working furiously behind the scenes to come up with the solution, but they couldn't just tell people publicly, and then people were like, oh, why aren't you communicating with us? And, you know, that was sort of an awkward situation, but I think people are really happy with the result and more positivity moving forward.
PR is a touchy thing anyways, because it's like, if no matter what you say, you're going to make someone unhappy, but then silence makes people unhappy as well. So you're in this really weird rock and a hard spot where they needed to wait until they had a 100% solid, not changing their mind answer before they said anything, and at least admitting, hearing, like, we wanted to say something, but we weren't there yet. It's just nice to see these types of Q&As where you see the really human side of these developers who so often just get pummeled on the forums.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm really happy with it. I also think it's cool that the way it's set up, you have to explore Tanan and do the reputations and experience that on the ground to appreciate all the cool treasures and jumping games on little, falling in the lava. But you can eventually fly there as well because reputations do take some effort. So, you've demonstrated you can master that sort of reputation content as well.
Yeah, and it's nice that it will apply to your other characters as well. So if you are leveling alts, which somebody mentioned later in the Q&A, like how do you think alts are faring in Warlords of Draenor? So if you do go ahead and get the Draenor Pathfinder achievement, your 90s will be able to fly and will be able to have it while leveling, which is nice.
One more detail I just want to mention. The Draenor Pathfinder achievement is account-wide progress.
Yeah.
So that means that if your Horde has Lore Master done and your Alliance has all the exploration done, you will have both of those categories counted, even though they're, two completely different characters.
Yeah, that was super surprising to me. I definitely thought they were going to make us do that on one character, but they're allowing that progress to be split, which is, it is what it is. Yeah. One of the things that was super surprising to me to hear in the Q&A is when they said that reps were not meant for Warlords of Draenor at all, that they had no intentions. That was so surprising to hear, and that when things were added in 6.1, like the Laughing Skull rep and whatever the Alliance one is called, that those were just kind of they were kind of like a last thought, and they weren't really. They were just we'll put these in with the trading post.
They were really added very close towards the end of beta, and I was surprised because usually reputations are something they were added very early in Mists of Pandaria, and I was sort of wondering what was happening to them. And as I said in the Q&A, they did feel a bit rushed and very different than the MOP ones, which had the very engrossing storylines and lots of flavor NPCs. But I just they said it was not intended for the scope of Warlords at all, and I think that's surprising because Warlords has so much lore and alternate timelines. It would be cool if someone that you helped in Burning Crusade was now showing up, in Draenor.
Well, that surprised me as well, too, because I feel like a lot of the expectations for Warlords of Draenor was that it was going to be really similar to Burning Crusade, and it was going to be really similar to, Vanilla in some aspects. So to hear them say, oh, no reps, what? The first thing you did when you hit 70 in Burning Crusade was go get exalted. Was go get exalted with the Aldor or the Scryers so that you could get flying. That reps were really important. So it was crazy to hear that they had no intentions for reps at all.
6.3 Aldor and Scryers, please. They'd be so cool.
That would be so cool. I would love to see them bring back Shatrith as a whole anyways, because it's so sad to see it all war riddled. So that was really surprising.
The developer said.
Yep, and they did say the 6.2 reps are going to be better than the 6.1 reps because they're not going to be as grindy. The Saberstalkers will be grindy, but there are also daily and weekly quests, and you have your faction hubs, which will have some daily quests, and you'll kill rares and stuff, and the Order of the Awakened will be to go get items and treasures and stuff like that. So it shouldn't be, like they said, go out and kill a bunch of people and be done with it. So
and just a few more thoughts on dailies. They were asked about Apexis crystals and how the Apexis dailies were both grindy and unfun, but also the rewards were not fun, so both questing was fun and then you couldn't really get stuff with it. So there are basically the Apexis dailies at first meant to be the opposite of World of Dailycraft and Mists of Pandaria, but it just went too far in the opposite direction. And instead of giving you outdoor freedom to kill things, you felt more grindy, and the story was lost, and the rep gear just took way too many Apexis crystals when you could get, similar gear from a mission or dungeons or other things that were more sort of, fun and...
and they did mention, too, that the Apexis dailies that will be coming in 6.2 are not very similar to the Apexis dailies that we saw in the beginning of the expansion.
We made the Tanan tour video. We can say firsthand that they are different.
They're way better.
There are some kill things in an area, but there are other things where, you go to a targeted area and you kill a certain number of a certain type of mob, or you loot a certain thing. It's, you loot 10 treasures, which is obviously very different from just killing 100 orcs.
Absolutely.
Straight.
So it's nice to hear them say things about this is what we were trying to do, because people really were outraged about dailies in Mists of Pandaria, so they tried to answer that, but they just took it a little bit too far. It was sort of like a knee-jerk reaction that And it's nice to see that they're, implementing something that's maybe a better compromise between World of Daily Craft and Zero Days.
I mean, I appreciate that they tried to fix World of Daily Craft, but it's also good that they realized that the solution didn't quite work and led to different problems, and now they're going to, constantly iterate on that idea and try to make it.
And one of the big things that they talked about during this Q&A was that outdoor content is really crucial to just gameplay being fun, and that was really neglected in Warlords of Draenor, and that garrisons were too rewarding, which is why you have people not really going out and doing anything in the world, and they're just standing in their garrison, and they're mining, and they're herbing, and they're getting all of this raid gear out of their garrison. So they use this information to really learn some lessons and apply that going forward.
Yeah, so one of the lessons learned is that the garrisons had too many rewards, and if you were short on time, which and for many of us are as we're getting older and still playing Warcraft, they were just the easiest, most efficient thing to do. If you only had a few minutes of time, you could log in and you could get like professions, you could get, missions that had gear, you could get gold really easily.
Yeah.
And there was like not as much of an incentive to actually leave your garrison.
Yeah. Which is one of those things where it's good and it's bad. If there was outdoor content to balance that out, it would be fine that was also an option, but it really lacked in that department, which is what we should be seeing some major improvements with 6.2 with all of Tanan, because there's so many things in Tanan that can't be done anywhere else. So that should be super nice. And they also talked about that gold from missions may be nerfed on your alts so that you don't feel the pressure to have a ton of level 3 garrisons. And that they want more interesting ways for people to be earning their gold.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, on one hand, it's like, oh, if I have all these alts, if I just log on to my garrison and hit a button, if they make gold for me, this gold making is so easy. But on the other hand, that's a lot of time if you're just logging on and off all of these characters, and it's not really fun or engaging, and it doesn't really keep you hooked on the game.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with that. And they talked a little bit about that shipyards and garrisons, like, even though the shipyard is an expansion of the garrison, they don't share identical mechanics. Shipyards are going to be more concentrated, more condensed. They're not going to be so much micromanagement. You'll have fewer missions, less frequently, that will give more impactful rewards. Some of those rewards include bind on account 650 baleful gear tokens, so you can send that gear to your alts. It's not just going to be stuff that's getting vendored or disenchanted. There's also the left shark pet, which I still giggle about. There's going to be a river beast mount and heirloom rings, which I think is by far the most interesting thing that we'll be able to get out of shipyards, because right now you have to win the fishing tournament in order to get an heirloom ring. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, and there's also just talking about ships in general. There's less grindiness for gearing them up. They don't have any level 90 to 100 grinds. There's just, uncommon, rare, and epic, no item level things you attach to your ships. And there's also this really neat mechanic that wasn't mentioned in the Q&A, but that's on the PTR, where your ships have different locations in the sea, and there are blockade missions that block the other missions, so you have to get those done. So it sort of helps you with your pacing. You can't just do 20 missions at once.
Yeah, you can't have a lot of ships either.
You only have 5 ships. So, you'll be putting your ships on the blockade mission, clearing that, which takes, a pretty long time, and then picking which ones you want to do. So, and they're also a lot longer. There's no, cleaning the latrines. I'm gonna go do this for 5 minutes and come back and then start another. They're like pretty long. You can go to sleep and still have them still going.
Yeah, which is really nice. And then they talked a little about the future of garrisons, and that garrisons are going to remain in Draenor, and that while the tech could be reused, and it makes sense because it's really extensive, it won't be exactly what we're seeing right now in garrisons, which is kind of hopeful, because what everybody really wanted in garrisons when these were announced was player housing. People wanted player housing, people wanted guild housing. They didn't want to play the game in their house 24/7. They just wanted to have that be an available feature. So maybe we'll see the tech used in that way, and that's obviously just speculation, but
I mean, the shipyard is a nice sort of improvement, or I guess variation on the follower table, how instead of this list of missions, you've got this map and you've got the blockades to pace things out, and you can rename the ships, and so I think there's promise. It's it's like you said, it's really, there's a lot of tech and complexity involved in the garrisons, so I think that they'll have to reuse it. It would be a wise investment.
Yeah, it would be wise of them to reuse it, but to reuse it in a way that doesn't really restrict people to staying in whatever the new thing is all the time. I would really love to see it if it was guild wide. I would love like a guild hall. That would, in my opinion, that would be the best way to handle this, where you can have your guild bank and things. I don't know. And they talked quite a bit about Mythic Raids, that it was, Hold on, let me restructure these notes right quick here. Talk a little about time walking
Okay.
perk.
Yeah, so time walking is a new dungeon difficulty and bonus event coming in 6.2. There are going to be different cool things you can do on the weekends, and some of them are you can run Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King dungeons, scale down to gear that's appropriate for that level. So it's really good because, you know, if you're doing things with friends, they don't have great gear, you can just run it together, go on a nostalgia trip, and have fun. So people are asking, you know, why, if this is, it's really cool, why is it only around for bonus periods? So it doesn't feel, and they basically said that, well, we don't want this to feel mandatory, and it would feel odd if we added dungeons and then players realized that it had worse gear than the other dungeons.
Yeah.
So, you know, it didn't really make sense, but it's really cool to have around as a fun,
just something fun to do on the weekends. Absolutely. And like, I think it's really important to note, and this is something that they really wanted to get across, was that it wasn't new dungeons or time walking dungeons. Like, the amount of resources in those two things are not comparable at all. Like, to make a whole new dungeon is starting from the ground up, whereas time walking is just scaling some things around. So this wasn't a matter of this or that. It was, well, we can do this, so let's do it. Which is really nice. And I think time walking is going to be fun and nostalgic, especially if you did play in BC or Wrath or whatever ones they end up adding in the future. And that brings us right into Mythic Dungeons.
Oh, we could talk about time working versus LFR a little.
Oh, yes. Do it.
Yeah. So people were also saying, you know, if I want to gear up and be alt friendly, why would I do time walking versus LFR? And the idea was that when time walking is up, you can chain run that. It's really friendly for alts. It's not one lockout a day. But LFR is one shot at gear, so you know, if you don't get it, you're out of luck.
Yeah, and you also don't have to be max level to do time walking, correct?
Right. So that's really nice. Yeah, and also there's a bonus quest that will give you an extra bonus roll item, the Seal of Inevitable Fate, if you run, I believe, 5 time walking dungeons on that weekend. So if you're raiding, that's another reason that you'd want to do time walking over LFR. You could actually get something that helps you with your top level raid. So that's pretty nice.
And that's kind of a nice reward too, since we were just talking about like raid caches being a little too powerful from garrisons. Like, that's like a nice compromise, because you can't use those seals unless you're in the raid downing the boss anyways. It gives you an extra chance at loot, but it's not just like handing you loot that you didn't like quote unquote earn. So that's super nice as well.
And it's also nice that it scales down. You can also do things that, as you mentioned, that are with friends that are not max level. Yeah. But if you are max level and your gear isn't very good, you won't feel bad if you're in a dungeon with people that have, you know, that's 60 item levels higher, and you feel bad that you're underperforming. Like, everyone's on the same level. Everyone's item level is going to be like 95 in Burning Crusade ones and like 160 or something in Wrath ones.
Yeah, it should be a nice way to get a little gear on alts that you otherwise might not be able to play because you're under geared and stuff. So, Mythic Dungeons now?
Yeah, we can talk about them now.
Mythic Dungeons are obviously also coming in 6.2, and it was a topic that they talked a little bit about during today's Q&A, and I thought one of the most interesting points that they made was that Mythic Dungeons are not intended for Mythic Raiders, which I think is one of those misconceptions that a lot of people had, because you hear Mythic and it's just the assumption that you make. These are going to be more for your normal and heroic raiders to get some supplemental loot for those raids, where this loot is going to be not as good as what Mythic Raiders already have. And dungeons have sort of gone obsolete, which is one of the things they talked about, that the launch dungeons from Warlords of Draenor don't really have meaningful rewards the way that they would like them to.
I have been saying that because I was really busy on time when Warlords hit, obviously, managing Wowhead, and I was getting all this mission gear that was item level 630 and 645, saying, wait, but this is as good as the dungeon loot. So it just, those missions logging on 5 minutes now and then managing my followers sort of removed the need for me to keep running dungeons for fun.
Yeah. I mean, the inn did provide a little bit of cushion with that, because if you had an inn, there's a lot of things. Well, even aside from the toys and stuff, the caches that you get from those give you potions and flasks and gold. So if you are willing to put the time in, I still think there are rewards, but maybe the inn shouldn't have been a necessary building in order to keep the dungeons relevant. Maybe that should have been just a guy in your garrison that was like, hey, here's a quest. But
I think that'd be a compromise.
Yeah, that's not like super relevant to this conversation. But Mythic Dungeons are kind of like their solution for dungeons being sort of obsolete right now. It's going to be really good for people who are around the 660, 670 gear level that want to do things with friends and want to get rewards out of it.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the loot from Mythic Dungeons will be item level 685, and as the patch notes state, there is a chance for the loot from the last boss to be item level 700.
Yep.
If you are suddenly interested in running dungeons again, we have guides to all of the dungeons, as well as pages that show all of the bosses' loot drops, and if you look on the PTR site, we've already got the Mythic loot tables up, so you can browse that and see if there's anything that's an upgrade for you there.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. And just to reiterate one more time, they really were serious about that this wasn't like time walking over dungeons or Mythic Dungeons over dungeons. New dungeons were not planned for this content, and these were just 2 extra things. Like time walking and Mythic Dungeons were just extra things they could add, so why not add them? They also talked pretty extensively about Mythic Raids and their value, which I thought was really interesting, because one of the things they really said was that Mythic Raids at their 20-man structure are valuable for encounter balance reasons. Like, they can make these encounters for a specific amount of people, and before they had this big ongoing debate of whether it was better to raid with 10 or 25 people, which was better, and it was kind of weird because of the world first sort of races,
right?
And you had different size guilds.
People thinking one difficulty was better on 10 or 25.
Yeah.
Could not measuring progression.
Yeah, and keeping Mythic at a solid 20 people also opened it up for the normal and heroic encounters to become flex, so you can have between 10 and 30 players, and it allows them to be cross-realm as well, which I think has really helped a lot of people. Like, my guild will recruit people, and will recruit people from different servers, and they don't have to make that commitment to transferring to the server. They can raid with us for a couple weeks, get a feel for it, and then if they like the guild, they can transfer over. So I think that's kind of like a hidden benefit to this whole thing. They talked a little more about Mythic fights and their time length. They said that Imperator, that his fight was too long on Mythic. It was like 15 plus minutes, which is crazy. I can't, like, my guild was certainly never at Mythic Imp, but that would be just horrible, getting to 15 minutes wiping. Yeah,
the end boss fights should feel epic and longer than the other ones, but that was pushing.
Not that long. And they talked about Maidens being like a good length but having a slow start, but that Brackenspore was kind of an ideal example of a well-executed endurance fight. It's nice to hear that they are taking those things into consideration going forward, and that hopefully we won't see 15-minute encounters in the future.
I just noticed another cool Mythic tidbit in the Q&A live blog, and it was the people were asking if Mythic, with its bonuses like the extra mechanics and art, is it justified if such a small percentage of people participate in it? And the answer was that it's good because the competition can show who is the best. And it also, surprisingly, it does not take up a huge amount of, resources.
Yeah.
So it's, if it helps community morale and, it helps get people hooked on raiding, then that's good. Basically, the raid itself is like, when you build a raid, that's like 90% of the way there. And Mythic is maybe 5% of that effort.
Yeah, so that's nice to hear, too, that it's not like, oh, well, they only care about super end game. I'm being overlooked kind of thing. Like, if you're hearing that only about 5% of the resources are being spent on it, it doesn't feel so bad.
Yeah, it's also good if it makes sense if they say things such as, oh, these dungeons, if they take new art, that takes a lot of time, and then they can offer an example that Mythic, Mythic art in comparison takes not a huge amount of time. It's good that they're talking about what is really time consuming and what isn't, so it's not just, everything is very time consuming.
Yeah. And then they got a little bit into class balance, and as a reminder, Ian Hazakostas is not the PvP designer. That's more of a Holinka department, so they didn't really talk too much about PvP. The majority of the class balance stuff that they talked about was PvE, and this was probably my favorite moment of the Q&A. Somebody asked why Demonology Warlocks were getting nerfed into a ground, and Ian literally said, because we don't want you playing Demonology Warlocks, which made me giggle. And it's kind of a hard thing to hear if you enjoy playing a Demonology Warlock, but it is also nice to hear Blizzard saying, well, this isn't the best spec right now, and if you're not playing it at the skill cap, you're kind of impacting other players negatively, and to hear that saying, like, well, we don't want other people to be, impacted by, like, a scrub demo lock is, while crappy, they're saying we're working on it, but we need to make sure people aren't, ruining everybody else's experience while we're doing it.
The way it's designed felt very complex and not super intuitive, and there's a danger that if you want to play it, you'll either feel overwhelmed by everything you have to do right, or if you see a TLDR, it will be too simplified and you'll be misled, and then everyone else in your group will be sad with you.
Exactly. So they're saying right now it is viable at this very moment, but it's not the best spec by far. So that's kind of what their plan is to put it on the back burner for now while they work on it, and to encourage you gently to play other specs. And there were some questions about ability pruning, which I was surprised. It's been a while, so I was surprised to see these questions, but it was also nice to hear them answered. And Watcher talked about ability pruning not going too far, but they did cut some abilities that shouldn't necessarily have been cut. So, which is kind of...
if you are a new player, if you are new in Warlords, Mists in Pandaria, they cut so many abilities. There used to be very complex talent trees, like 30 decisions you can make, and now there's only, 6 or 7.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but they took whole abilities out. They really did some... I didn't get affected terribly because I'm like a shaman, but there are some classes that lost like half their abilities. They talked a little bit more about rotations as well, and I thought this was an interesting topic to cover. They said that your rotation shouldn't be like the funnest thing ever on a target dummy, because they want your rotations to be kind of like easy enough so that you are capable of reacting to difficult mechanics, which is it's an interesting way to look at it for sure.
Yeah, so it's more about improving your skill and reaction times, and not just, perfecting like the perfect rotation on paper. It's not like Patchwork where you're just standing still. They want to move away from things like that, and it's more, hey, here's an ability that might be good in this sort of encounter, so I'm going to use it then, or I'm going to use this interesting utility one because this other encounter wants me to do it, or it's going to value, moving out of the bad stuff more than just standing still.
Yeah, or even fights when you have to decide, like, whether to be AoE or cleaving or single target, because there's like a weird number of targets and stuff. So it's more about, strategy and reaction time and stuff like that, which was kind of an interesting thing to hear, and I never looked at it that way. And then the last thing they talked about class related was that absorbs are still really strong right now. They're not as strong as they were in Mists of Pandaria, but Disc Priest, man, they're good.
Yeah, they did talk a little bit about Disc Priest, how right now they feel mandatory, and that they think that Holy is in a really cool, versatile spot, but if you're in a small group and you only have one priest in the raid, it should be disciplined.
Absolutely.
So that makes Holy Priest sad, and also that absorbs are fundamentally interesting, but the way Disc Priests are set up, they sort of, spoil the fun for other healers in that sense.
Yeah, I could see that. Or at least if they were giving other players absorbs as well, so that it wasn't like Disc Priests are like your shield bots, and then everybody else is healing to compensate for the shields. It would be nice if they kind of split the shields up so that everybody maybe had some sort of ability like that, but I am not a game designer. The next thing that they talked about were professions, which I thought this was pretty interesting because I think this has been a big complaint in Warlords of Draenor.
Yeah, another candid part of the Q&A.
Yeah, so it was nice to hear this stuff, and Blizzard outwardly acknowledged that professions are better when you're out in the world. Professions were better before garrisons. And that one of the fixes that they're trying to make to this, and one of the implementations that they're doing, is all of the profession stuff that's coming in 6.2, like Fellblight. Fellblight can only be collected from out in the world collecting in Tanan, so you're not going to be able to get Fellblight from your garrison or from your barn or from your herbs and mines.
Originally, very early in the PTR it was, and then I think they realized that they couldn't go that route of sticking Fellblight on a garrison building, and they just it's been totally scrapped.
Yeah, so you can only get it from mining, fishing, herbalism, and skinning in Tanan.
Yep. Yeah, and you can kill Kazakh for like 10 a week, but that's a relatively small amount. You want to be gathering to get it.
So, and which is nice. And then they also made it so that your personal professions, so not your profession buildings, but that cooldown that you use every day on your professions will give you more stuff. So they're really trying to make it so that there is competition between people who are just like standing in their garrisons and people who are using their own professions that they've leveled all the way up and going out into Nan and collecting things out in the world. They're definitely rewarding people more in 6.2 for getting out.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, like if you had your work orders and then you put the follower on the building and then you did those garrison missions for the rush orders, it was really emphasizing that you needed to have your profession building, and that's where everything came from. But yeah, it's also good to see them mixing up. Just another quick note on Fellblight. It's used in all the stage 5 and 6 crafting items, so all the crafting gear is getting 2 more upgrades. And the recipes for that you buy at your garrison trader. That's not something that the garrison profession NPC will teach you.
No, it's like the fur trader or whatever that switches in and out every day.
There's epic gems, which I just realized too. You have to go out into the world into Tanan to get them crafted at first.
Yep.
So another way to get you out of the garrison. And there's also the very cool Glyph of Ascendance, which is a cool cosmetic glyph, and we have a video on that. And that also takes Spell Blight, presumably because it's so awesome, so they had to make the materials very difficult.
I think it's super cool. It's sort of like, it's sort of reminiscent of like Glyph of the Stars, but it does like cool animations for each shaman spec. So if you are elemental, you kind of get like fire and like embers, and if you're resto, it's very like watery. So
yeah.
I think it's neat. I'm a shaman. I'm biased. And then I loved the part of the Q&A where they were really adamant that selfies did not replace any content. You didn't get selfies in place of a raid or a BG or an arena. Like, selfies were designed by one developer and one designer for funsies. It was just for fun.
They give other examples of things that, you know, some of the cool flavor bits of the Brawlers Guild or a toy or a cool NPC Easter egg. Those are things that are basically equivalent to a selfie camera. Some developer decides that it'd be really cool if this little personalized detail was out there in the world, and they take it upon themselves to implement it. It's not something that they bring up at a meeting and say, well, today I think I will work on making this NPC instead of, building Tanan. And I know in the past they mentioned other things. For example, the low-level dungeons in Warlords, like Razorfen Crawl, getting redone. That was something that people just like for fun on the side. So view the selfie camera in the context of that versus this was meant to be like a team effort.
Yeah, like this is content. It was just a fun thing. And it's also kind of cool to hear that was like developed by one person. Like, good job. Yeah. Good on you, guy.
I mean, it's super popular. I know some people hate it, but other people love it. So it's like, great, your work had a ton of impact.
Yeah.
I wonder who made it now.
I know. Tell us. And they talked a little about 6.1, and I think this was by far the most candid part of the entire Q&A.
I was very impressed.
I was very impressed to hear them outwardly say that 6.1 should not have been called a content patch. It should have been like 6.0.5, and that by calling it a content patch, by making it 6.1, that they set unfair
expectations.
That this was more of a bug fix patch that contained like quality of life improvements and little stuff here and there to add a little more structure. But there's a reason the patch didn't have a formal name. It wasn't meant to be a big update, and they outwardly apologized that people felt misled by it being called 6.1. So that was really impressive to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little confused at first when I was looking at the information and, you know, thinking that 6.1 would have like a new zone or a Brawlers Guild equivalent, and then it never did. And they tried to explain also that the way the timing worked out, like, it was really good that Warlords came out after BlizzCon and rode the hype train, but then you hit the holidays, and that puts a wrench on his working schedule. And they really wanted to get all the bug fixes out because, you know, like, Garrisons, they did have some issues at launch. You know, missions had to be smoothed out more. Like, the missions UI didn't look that great. They should have added profession missions. You know, daily quests should have been in the Garrison to give some variety. So it's really good that they rushed to get that in. It's just, I think it's sort of like the PR angle and the way it was presented was unclear because usually the 0.1 patches were like landfall, it's usually super big.
Yeah, and it was even kind of awkward too because they didn't have Blackrock Foundry in that patch. Blackrock Foundry was patched in like 2 or 3 weeks before then, so that would have been their, we had a new raid, but the raid wasn't even in the patch. So a lot of people, like myself, kind of tried to justify it with, they gave us the raid a little bit early. It was nice that they didn't just hold the raid for the patch for that reason. But then it's also even nicer to hear, like, no, we shouldn't have called that a content patch. We messed up. We're sorry. And anytime you hear people, I mean, it sucks to apologize. It sucks to admit you're wrong. So it's nice to hear that.
Yeah, in front of thousands of people, too.
So I'm not mad. I'm not mad about it. I'm really excited for 6.2. You want to talk a little about the Transmog?
Yeah, Transmog is fun. So people were asking, Blizzard published a Transmog preview of all of the 6.2 sets, and people were curious why the PvE and PvP sets looked alike just with different colors. And now, if you were playing back in Burning Crusade, the exact same thing is going on. Back in Burning Crusade, for each tier, the sets looked identical, just with different colors.
Yeah.
And what they added an extra spin where the top tier sets, like Mythic and Elite Conquest, look more interesting, like they've got extra things on their shoulders and glowy effects, and they wanted to go back to this model to show that there's one set of armor to show that you're, totally awesome at the content you have mastered, and another set to show that, you participated, but you're sort of more like the average band of players, and they would rather do that as opposed to having like a totally different, like they want, if you're a gladiator, you want people to say, hey, that looks like the mythic armor, this person is awesome at whatever they do.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting way to view it as well. And I also appreciate when he was talking about how they try to gear the more like sinister colors, like reds and blacks, towards PvP, and then more like the heroic type of colors towards PvE players. I just thought that was like a really funny, like, you guys are out killing each other and you guys are out killing monsters.
There is a really unique set of gear, though, coming in 6.2 from the Final Boss Archimond. It's 3 pieces of cloth armor, his waist, his shoulders, and his helm that resembles what he's actually wearing in the game. So if you don't want to wear the tier 18 armor, aim to get those pieces. They look really awesome. And in our Tanan Jungle Guide, we also cover some of the rare spawns, which drop, like gloves here, boots there, that have interesting models. Like, there's a chest piece that fills in a transmog set from Cataclysm leveling. There's all sorts of cool, quirky, obscure things out there. So there are those, sort of personalized, quirky transmog touches in the patch. It's just the tier 18 and season 2 look pretty similar. And if you're curious what pieces match and want to sort of dig into it, we have our transmog set database all updated. You can browse all the sets. You can see what the armor looks like on any race or gender. So
you
super
can log
useful.
in and do it right on your own character too. So you can import your character and put on your sets, and you can save it. You can grab a line of code to bring it right over into Mogit so that you can see it in game and share it with your friends in game that way. What's cool too is they just updated the dressing room on Wowhead so that you can see yourself on mounts, which I actually thought was super interesting for a reason that wasn't mentioned. But like, if you're ever considering buying a store mount, like I bought the gold...
The Rune Saber?
No, I'm specifically thinking about the gold serpenty one with the wings. I bought it and I hated the way my character looked on it. Like, she kind of wrote it funny because she was a panda, and had I had that resource available to see my character on the mount, I would have bought a different one. So I think it's a cool feature for sure, especially if you're into transmog and stuff like that.
I've definitely previewed my character in the score in the with the Soaring Sky Terror that just came up. I'm like, oh yeah, she looks pretty good on this.
Yeah, I had my panda on it yesterday too. That's such a nice mount though. With it's almost like Experiment B12 in Rylac form. Yeah,
they both have the chromatic word in their mount descriptions, so it makes sense that they're going for like that red golden look. So,
it's nice.
I'm super excited.
It looks very Warlords too, and even though there is one other Rylac mount in game, there isn't another Rylac mount that you can get just by playing the game. The other one has to be purchased. So it is nice that there is now one that you can get in game, and they are very different. Even though they're both Rylacs, one of them has rockets and armor and all sorts of crazy stuff, and the other one is just like, he's the Wind Rider of Rylacs.
We should probably wrap it up and talk about their final question.
Yeah, they talked quite a bit about the loot itemization in Hellfire Citadel. And one of the big questions was why Archimond doesn't have loot for every spec. And the answers to this was another just super hilarious reply. And he was like, everyone's not even killing Mythic Archimond, LOL. And then they kind of went on to further detail it. Like, the specific question was about agility weapons, and what he said was, well, there's agility weapons that drop that are like 730, so while you're on that Mythic Archimond attempt, like, you're going to be out gearing your clothy friends. So that was an interesting way to look at it, for sure.
Also viewing the tier as sort of a continuous spectrum, that you're meant to kill the bosses on one tier and then move on to the next tier. So for example, if you're killing a boss on normal and you've got a normal weapon from the end of those bosses, when you start working on the early ones in heroic, that early heroic drop is going to be better than your normal one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's this cycle where you'll be constantly getting upgrades as you work your way through difficulties, and as you're progressing on the final boss on Mythic, people are not going to have fully optimized sets. No one will have item level 735 gear when he's not dead.
Yeah.
And someone might not have, their gloves drop, someone might not have their 4-piece set bonus because of bad luck. So everyone is going to be sort of uneven with gear. And then when you're fully geared up and you're killing him every week, the progression is over, and at that point you're sort of more concerned about maximizing your DPS for parses and not the actual progression. So
yeah, which in cases like that, you're really not, like, nobody would be like, wow, look at this subtlety rogue compared to this enhancement shaman. Like, that's not the way it works. When you are comparing yourself in terms of if you're doing optimal DPS for your gear, you're looking at other people with that gear, meaning that your competition is also not going to have that or 735 weapon available either, which was a good way to look at it as well. So, did we miss anything, Perk?
I am scrolling. Give me a quick minute. I think that there was one thing I wanted to bring up. I'm looking at the fourth question about Blizzard's approach to making things convenient, and is there a concern that things could be too convenient? And, they're talking about how there's always a risk involved. If there's travel, if you put portals in cataclysm zones, it feels like less of a world, you're exploring less.
Yeah.
Or, group finder is great for finding people, but it's less social interaction. They also talked about some positive things, like the current version of the group finder and how it can enhance your game as opposed to just making it easier.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the group finder was a really good change for the better. That was something they talked a little bit more about as well. But I think that about wraps up our post Q&A discussion and analysis. If you enjoyed this show, Perk and I do a podcast on World of Warcraft every week, Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can follow our channel or subscribe to our channel if you want to keep up to date on that. Pretty much anything we talked about today, there are going to be guides on Wowhead. Wowhead has guides for everything.
We also, if you may have noticed, we are featured in the launcher this weekend for a video guide we did, the Tanan Jungle Tour, and we're super excited to be there. And, definitely check that out. It's like 15 minutes or so going over all the rares and toys, goes over the reputations that we mentioned, all sorts of cool things. And we also have a flying tool, wowhead.com/flying, that tells you what you still need to get done for flying, as well as a guide that covers a lot of the questions that people have, such as, more in-depth topics on those rep grinds and the time frame for them and exactly what you have to do to get every achievement in that done.
Yeah, we also have a few contests going on Wowhead right now. If you're interested, you can use the Wowhead tool for flying and go find the flying post. It's still on the front page of Wowhead. I think it's like the third or fourth post down. And if you answer the question, you'll be entered to win either a Grinning Reaver or a Mystic Runesaber. The post directly above that, there's a chance to win. I believe it's a headset.
Yeah, Plantronics headset.
Yeah, Plantronics headset, if you follow the directions there. And then this morning we just posted another contest to win 1 of 10 The Art of Warcraft books. And that, again, is also for using the wowhead.com/flying tool. So, yeah, those are all the things I think we have going on. So thank you so much for joining us. A ton of you guys stayed around to watch us, and we appreciate that so much. And
thank you, Blizzard, for hosting us.
Yeah,
that was
thanks.
Very awesome of you. Yeah.
That was really nice. And I think the chat has actually been pretty decent for Twitch, so pat yourselves on the back for being civilized people. We're going to go. I hope that you guys have a great weekend. I hope that you feel like some of your questions were answered after the Q&A, and I would keep an eye on the forums and follow Laura and Watcher on Twitter, because sometimes they answer questions there as well. And if you would like to follow Perk or myself, I am at Trade Chat, and she is at Perculia, which you see on your screen right now. So I think we're going to wrap this up. Everybody have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.